We're fighting the exact same cosmic war. We're fighting a war between good and evil, except we're good and they're evil. We're fighting a war whose purpose is to rid the world of evil. Rid the world of evil. We're fighting a war not over land, but over...
Let me interrupt you. It seems to me, right, we can agree that evil is not going to be eradicated from the world, and we can agree that they're not going to succeed in building a universal caliphate. But just because people are wrong in their goals, isn't the thing that's changed now that they have potentially the ability to use means of destruction in the pursuit of stupid goals that would actually destroy civilization? I mean, isn't that the lesson of the World Trade Center being obliterated, that you could imagine the same people, had they had access to these more destructive weapons, using them without any hesitation?
Of course they would use them without hesitation. That's because they're terrorists without any goals and whose sole ideology is to sow chaos and terror. But the idea that they would use whatever means at their disposal to wreak havoc and chaos upon the world is a far cry from the sort of existential threat to civilization. Our political establishment has been saying for 4 years, that this is not a war between civilizations. This is a war for civilization. Guess what? That's exactly what bin Laden has been saying too, that this is not a war for politics or economics. This is a war for identity. The problem with the war over identity is that it's unlosable. You cannot surrender or negotiate or compromise when what is supposedly at stake is human civilization as we know it. But that's not what's at stake. This is a criminal enterprise, and we should be launching an investigation of it to bring a small group of people to justice. The fact that we have turned this into a war, because look, this isn't a surprise. It's not like I know something special here. I read bin Laden's writings, and he says repeatedly that his terrorist actions, which he refers to as messages to America, that's how he talks about it, had one purpose and one purpose only: to get attention, to say, you're at war with us, pay attention to us, we will not be ignored. By essentially swallowing whole the framework of this heavenly cosmic war, that this war of imagination that they think they're fighting, by accepting that in total, we have validated their viewpoint of the world and have strengthened them, because this isn't a war between us and them over civilization. It's a conflict between us and them over this very large audience. And that audience, the more we continue to embolden and empower the jihadists, the more they take the jihadists seriously, and the more they turn to them instead of us. That's why we're losing this war.
Okay. Do you want to comment on that, or should we go over the question?
Well, I'd like to just talk a little bit about potential solutions. And I do emphasize the word potential, and recognizing as a historian that any so-called solution breeds its own set of problems and is only ever partial as a result. But I've written about, and I know that there are many people in America who share this aspiration, that women in the Muslim world are the key to restoring the universal human civilization of which we have just heard, notions of reason, which are very well endowed within Islam, notions of, as I say, humanity, of compassion, of mercy. And the idea here actually is not a difficult one. Microcredit loans for the women of the Muslim world, give them the choice to accept these loans, and with these loans they can create businesses that fill gaping holes in goods and services in their own communities, in part addressing the economic poverty with which we started off this conversation. But the beauty is that this is also a real tribute to Islam itself, because for all of the differences of opinion on all sorts of issues within Islam, there actually is consensus, even in today's Islam, that when a woman earns her own assets, she gets to keep 100% of those assets and do with them as she sees fit. And what could women do with the assets they earn from micro businesses? Well, for starters, they could become literate, learn to read the Quran for themselves, and pick up on all of those verses that, frankly, the imams and mullahs and ayatollahs leave out, don't convey to them, such as verses that encourage them and not just permit them to draw up marriage contracts so that in the event of a major disagreement between husband and wife, the wife's interests will be as much protected, and her interests as she defines them, as the husband's interests will be. Let me just quickly say that, again, this is not an idea out of the blue, and it's not original, and it's very much backed up by the experiences of the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. One of the founders, there are others, but one of the founders is now a Nobel laureate, and has shown that in the last 30 years, when Muslim women accept such loans, these loans are used to not just lift their quality of life, but to lift the quality of life of entire towns and villages. And the repayment rate of these things, 98, 99%, compared to about 10% repayment rate for commercial lenders. And finally, I would add that more than just a tribute to Islam, an idea like this, an approach like this, is even a tribute to the founder of Islam, to the Prophet Muhammad himself. His beloved first wife, Khadija, was a wealthy, self-made merchant who employed the Prophet Muhammad. And if Muslim men are serious about emulating the Prophet's life, it seems to me that they will be more than comfortable with working for their wives, or, if not that, at least letting their wives work for themselves. People like me who argue that this is an approach worth experimenting with are not trying to change Islam. We are trying to change Muslims to live up to the best spirit of Islam. That's right. And this has policy implications. Why not a brand new coalition of the willing? Sorry to use that reference, but just to make it familiar. Why not a brand new coalition of the willing? A coalition of rich countries, not necessarily led by the United States, why not Canada, but also including rich Arab countries, taking just a sliver. To hell with taking an entire slice, let's not be that ambitious, just a sliver of their defense budgets, pooling them into a coherent program of microloans for the women of the Muslim world. It seems to me that there is, this is an idea that transcends partisan labels. And I'll say one final thing in order to suggest why I believe this. A couple of years ago, I was at Stanford University and speaking, and the other person sharing the podium with me that day was none other than General John Abizaid, at that time head of Central Command for the United States in Iraq. He spoke before I did. I did not plant the idea of micro-business loans. Someone in the audience, upon hearing him speak, raised her hand and asked, General, is there anything we Americans can now do to clean up the mess we've made in Iraq without resort to more guns and ammo? And without any hesitation, General Abizaid responded, yup, micro-business loans for the women of Iraq. This idea has been out there for a long time. And once again, if President Bush was sincere in saying that it's not the politicians in D.C. who will decide what happens in Iraq, but my generals on the ground, here's the top general whose own idea seemed to have been lost in the ether. And for this, I honestly am profoundly, profoundly sorry.
Well, I don't want to get into a long conversation